The legal core of Deuteronomy, so really from 5 to 26, because 5 is where some of the legal material begins, contains, first of all, a somewhat expanded version of the Ten Commandments. You have that in Deuteronomy 5, and then other laws, really from 12 to 26, that resemble the legal material that's found in Exodus, the collection of material we call the Covenant Code. And they also seem to bear some relationship to the laws in Leviticus and Numbers. But the question is, what is the relationship between the different versions of the legal material? Some of these laws will parallel each other quite closely, and others do not. So are Deuteronomy's legal traditions a direct response to or modification of the laws in Exodus and Numbers, or are they best understood as just different, independent formulations of a common legal tradition? Weinfeld has argued that Deuteronomy is dependent on the previous traditions of the Pentateuch, that Deuteronomy revises and reforms them according to new ideas, its new notion of a centralized cultic worship, and secondly, its humanitarian spirit. Those are two controlling ideologies, he says, that shape its revision of pre-existing material. He specifically argues that Deuteronomy is dependent on the E source, the source that some scholars think is pretty hard to isolate or find in the biblical text. But in E, Sinai is referred to as Horeb, and in Deuteronomy, Sinai is also Horeb. So the author of Deuteronomy limits the revelation at Sinai to the Decalogue and seems to assert that the full law was given to Moses for the Israelites on the plains of Moab. In Weinfeld's view, this means that Deuteronomy, with its revisions, would have been presented as, and would have been seen as an updated replacement of the old Book of the Covenant, rather than its complement. It exists side by side in our text now. But I think in his view, those who promulgated it were understanding it as the updated replacement of the laws of the Book of the Covenant. For the most part, Deuteronomy doesn't really contain much in the way of civil law. It tends to focus on the moral religious prescriptions, kind of the apodictic law in Israel. And the few civil laws that are there tend to be reworked in line with Deuteronomy's humanity. So, for example, the laws of the tithe, the laws of the seventh-year release of debts, the rules for the release of slaves, the rules for the 3 festivals. These are all ancient laws. They occur in Exodus, but they appear in Deuteronomy with modifications about things that concern the Deuteronomists. So in Deuteronomy, the Israelite debt slave comes out of his or her servitude with generous gifts from the owner. This is not something that appears in Exodus. Or as another example, Deuteronomy extends the covenant code's prohibition against afflicting a resident alien. In Deuteronomy, there's the insistence that the Israelites must not just refrain from afflicting them, but must love the resident alien. It goes so far as to provide concrete legal benefits, food and so on, for the resident alien. So while the relationship of D to some of the laws in the covenant code is often, not always, but often one of revision, the relationship between D and the laws in the priestly source is more difficult to characterize. The priestly source seems to represent an equally early set of laws, legal traditions, that just emanated from a very different circle and had different concerns. It tends to deal with sacral topics, or if it's dealing with other topics, it will deal with the sacral implications of those topics. Like D, P often updates and revises laws of the covenant code. We can see that in the fact that the priestly source abolishes Israelite debt slavery altogether and insists that slaves must be acquired only from the nations around Israel. No Israelite can enslave another Israelite. Nevertheless, Weinfeld argues that on occasion, Deuteronomy contains laws that are also found in P, but presents them in a more rational manner, is the word he uses, or desacralized manner. So Deuteronomy's treatment of sacrifice, we'll see in a moment, is going to be different, for example, from P's. They have different concerns and different foci in their presentation of that material.